My daughter-in-law smiled at me across the candlelight, sliding a bowl of homemade sweet potato pie toward my place setting. It was my favorite dessert, a recipe passed down from my great-grandmother, but as she urged me to take the first bite, I realized something terrifying. That bowl was laced with enough high blood pressure medication to stop the heart of a horse, let alone a 70-year-old man. I did not scream. I did not flip the table. Instead, I reached under the tablecloth, texted 911, and prepared to give the performance of a lifetime. My name is Cyrus Blackwood. I am 70 years old, and for the last 40 years I have let the world believe I am just a retired HVAC contractor living on a modest pension. I drive a 10-year-old Ford truck. I wear flannel shirts from Costco. I live in the same 3-bedroom house in a quiet working-class neighborhood in Atlanta, where I raised my son. What nobody knows, not even my own flesh and blood, is that those dusty years of crawling through attics and fixing furnaces were just the beginning. I took every dime of profit and bought land when the market crashed. I renovated apartment complexes when nobody else would touch them. Today, I own a portfolio of commercial real estate worth north of $50 million, but I kept it quiet. I wanted my son Tyson to build his own character, not live in the shadow of my checkbook. I thought I was teaching him value. Instead, it seems I only taught him resentment. Before I tell you how I dismantled their lives piece by piece, please let me know where you are watching from in the comments below. If you have ever been underestimated by the people who were supposed to love you, hit that like button and subscribe. Trust me, you are going to want to see how this ends. The nightmare began 3 hours earlier. It was Christmas Eve, and the air inside Tyson's oversized mortgage-to-the-hilt suburban house was stifling. The heating was cranked up too high, likely to compensate for the drafty windows they could not afford to fix. My son Tyson sat at the head of the table, looking like a man shrinking inside his own skin. At 32, he still had the soft eyes of the boy I used to take fishing, but they were clouded now, darting nervously between me and his wife Tiffany. Tiffany. She sat there in a dress that probably cost more than my first car. Her blonde hair perfectly coiffed, her nails manicured into sharp red talons. She had always looked at me with a specific kind of expression, a mix of boredom and mild disgust, as if I were a stain on her pristine white carpet that she could not quite scrub out. We had just finished opening gifts. I had handed Tyson a small, heavy envelope. Inside was a savings bond, a classic stable investment I had purchased for him 20 years ago, now matured to a significant sum. It was not flashy, but it was real money. It was security. Tiffany had snatched the envelope from his hands before he could even thank me. She ripped it open, stared at the paper, and let out a short, sharp laugh that sounded like glass breaking. "Seriously, Cyrus," she said, tossing the bond onto the table like it was a piece of junk mail. "A savings bond. What is this? 1950? We are drowning in credit card bills for this renovation, and you give us paper money that we have to go to a bank to cash. We needed cash, or maybe that Rolex Tyson has been eyeing. You know, something that actually shows you care about your son's status." Tyson looked down at his plate. "Tiffany, it is a generous gift," he mumbled, but his voice was so quiet it barely registered. "Generous?" she scoffed, pouring herself another glass of wine. "It is cheap. Just like that truck outside, just like those boots you refuse to replace, you are sitting on a paid-off house in a gentrifying neighborhood, Cyrus. You could sell that place, move into a condo, and give us the equity. But no, you would rather hoard it. You are selfish. That is what you are." I sat there feeling the familiar ache in my chest. It wasn't a heart condition. It was heartbreak. I looked at my son, waiting for him to defend me. Waiting for him to say, "Dad worked hard for that house. Dad put me through college. Dad is a good man." But Tyson said nothing. He just took a long swallow of his drink and avoided my eyes. That is when the dizziness hit me. It came on sudden and sharp, a wave of nausea that made the room tilt. I had eaten a few spoonfuls of the lobster bisque Tiffany had served earlier. It tasted overly salty, heavy on the spices. I gripped the edge of the table, my knuckles turning ashy against the white tablecloth. "Are you okay, Dad?" Tyson asked, his voice trembling slightly. "I just need some water," I managed to say, pushing my chair back. The wood scraped loudly against the floor. "I need to clear my head." "Sit down, Cyrus," Tiffany said, her voice changing instantly from shrill to sickly sweet. "I will get it for you. Rest. You look terrible." "No," I said, forcing myself to stand. My legs felt like lead. "I need to walk a bit. I will get it." I stumbled out of the dining room, leaning heavily on the wall. The hallway was lined with photos of Tiffany and Tyson on vacations I knew they could not afford. Cabo, Paris, Aspen. Not a single photo of me. Not a single photo of my late wife, Beatrice. It was a shrine to their vanity. I made my way toward the kitchen, intending to get a glass of cold water from the tap. The door was slightly ajar. As I approached, I heard the clinking of ceramic and hushed, frantic whispering. I stopped. Decades of working on construction sites had taught me to be quiet when I needed to be. I pressed my back against the wall, peering through the crack in the door hinge. What I saw froze the blood in my veins. Tiffany was standing at the marble island. In front of her was the large ceramic bowl of sweet potato pie filling. Beside it lay a mortar and pestle and a scattering of blue pills. I recognized them instantly. They were my pills, my high-dosage beta blockers that I kept in my coat pocket for my arrhythmia. She was grinding them into a fine blue powder. "How many did you use?" Tyson whispered. He was standing by the refrigerator, his phone in his hand, his face pale and sweaty. "All of them," Tiffany hissed, dumping the powder into the orange mixture. She grabbed a spoon and began to stir it vigorously. The blue disappeared into the spices and the yam. "Is that too much?" Tyson asked, scrolling frantically on his phone. "Google says an overdose can cause cardiac arrest within an hour. What if it happens too fast? What if the paramedics see the symptoms?" "Stop being such a coward," she snapped. "He is old. He has a history of heart problems. Nobody is going to question it if his heart just gives out after a heavy Christmas meal. It happens all the time. We call 911, we cry, we tell them he complained of chest pains all night. It is airtight. But murder." Tiff Tyson's voice cracked. "He is my dad. He is an obstacle," she said, slamming the spoon down on the counter. She turned to face him, her eyes manic and wide. "Do you want to lose this house? Do you want the guys from Viper Capital coming back to break your legs over that gambling debt? We need his life insurance. We need the equity in his house, and we need it now. Not in 10 years when he finally kicks the bucket naturally. This is mercy, Tyson. We are putting him out of his misery and saving ourselves." Tyson lowered his phone. He looked at the floor, then back at the pie. "Okay," he whispered. "Okay, just make sure he eats it all." I felt bile rise in my throat. My own son. The boy I had taught to ride a bike. The boy I had held when he cried over his first heartbreak. He was not just letting this happen. He was researching the timeline. He was complicit. The dizziness I had felt earlier vanished, replaced by a cold, hard clarity. The adrenaline of survival flooded my system. I realized then that the soup had likely just been a test, a primer. The main event was the pie. I backed away from the door, moving silently across the plush carpet. I retreated into the living room, sitting in the armchair furthest from the kitchen. My hands were shaking not from fear, but from a rage so profound it felt like burning coal in my gut. I reached into my pocket and pulled out my phone. I did not dial the police immediately. I needed to be smarter than that. If I called the police now, they would claim I was confused senile. They would hide the pills. It would be my word against theirs. I needed undeniable proof. I needed a witness. I opened my text messages and typed 2 messages. The first was to 911. I kept it simple. Possible poisoning in progress. 70-year-old male. Address is 422 Oak Creek Lane. Suspects are preparing lethal dose in food. Send help, but silent approach. The second message was to Reggie King. Reggie was not just my lawyer. He was my brother-in-arms, a man I had served with in Vietnam 50 years ago. He was the only person who knew the true extent of my empire and the only man I trusted with my life. Code Omega, I typed. Activate the protocol. They just crossed the line. Bring the team to the hospital. I hit send and deleted the messages from the chat history. I slipped the phone back into my pocket just as the kitchen door swung open. Tiffany walked out carrying the bowl of pie with a smile that could have charmed a snake. Tyson followed her carrying dessert plates, looking like he was walking to the gallows. "Dad, you are here," Tiffany chirped. "I brought you the water, but I also thought we should just get straight to dessert. It is your favorite." She set the bowl down on the coffee table in front of me. The smell of cinnamon and nutmeg wafted up, masking the scent of betrayal. "Eat up, Cyrus," she said. "It is to die for." I looked at the bowl. I looked at my son. And I knew exactly what I had to do. I was not going to eat that pie, but but I was going to make them believe their plan had worked just long enough to tighten the noose around their own necks. I clutched my chest, let out a gasp, and prepared to die. Tiffany placed the ceramic bowl on the placemat with a delicate clink that sounded far too loud in the silent dining room. She smoothed her dress and took a step back, clasping her hands together under her chin in a pose of exaggerated anticipation. The steam rising from the bowl carried the rich, earthy scent of sweet potatoes, cinnamon, and nutmeg, a smell that usually transported me back to my mother's kitchen in Savannah. Tonight, however, it smelled like a chemical fire masked by sugar. I looked down at the orange mash. It was smooth, creamy, and perfectly innocent in appearance. There were no visible blue specks. She had done a thorough job with the mortar and pestle. "Go on," Cyrus Tiffany urged, her voice tight with a forced brightness. "It is best when it is piping hot. I know how much you love it." I looked up at her. Her eyes were wide, fixed on me with a predatory intensity. She was not blinking enough. Behind her, Tyson stood near the archway to the kitchen, wringing his hands. He looked like a man facing a firing squad. Sweat beaded on his forehead despite the chill I felt radiating from the table. He could not even look at the bowl. He was staring at his shoes, shifting his weight from foot to foot. I picked up my spoon. The silver felt cold and heavy in my hand, like a weapon I did not want to use. I dipped it into the mixture, swirling it slowly. The consistency was thick. I lifted a generous scoop, letting the steam waft toward my face. I watched them watch me. Tiffany leaned forward slightly, her breath held. Tyson finally looked up. His eyes locked on the spoon, hovering inches from my lips. I could see the terror in his face. It was not the terror of losing his father. It was the terror of committing the act. He was weak. He had always been weak. I had tried to toughen him up, taking him to job sites, showing him how to negotiate contracts, but he had always preferred the easy route, and now the easy route was murder. "Is something wrong?" Dad Tyson asked, his voice cracking. "You are just staring at it. I am just savoring the aroma." I said, my voice steady despite the rage burning in my gut. "It smells different this year. Did you change the recipe, Tiffany?" She flinched, a microscopic jerk of her head. "Just a dash of extra clove," she said quickly, "and maybe a secret ingredient. You know I like to experiment. Just try it, please." I brought the spoon closer to my mouth. I could see the muscles in her neck tense. She was practically vibrating with the need for me to swallow that poison. I held the spoon there for 5 seconds, 10 seconds. I let the silence stretch until it was thin and brittle. Then I dropped the spoon. It clattered loudly against the rim of the bowl, splashing a small dollop of the orange mixture onto the white tablecloth. I let out a sharp, guttural gasp. My hand flew to my chest, clutching the fabric of my flannel shirt. I squeezed my eyes shut and let out a low groan of pain. Cyrus Tiffany shrieked, but she did not move toward me. I convulsed in the chair, throwing my head back. I knocked my water glass over with my other hand, sending ice and water cascading across the table. I let my body go limp and slid sideways, crashing heavily onto the hardwood floor. Dad Tyson yelled. I lay on the floor, my face pressed against the cold wood. I kept my eyes squeezed shut, my breathing ragged and loud. I needed to sell this. I needed them to believe I was dying, but I also needed to see what they would do. I heard Tyson running toward me, his footsteps heavy and frantic. He dropped to his knees beside me. Dad, can you hear me? Don't touch him," Tiffany hissed. Her voice was right above me. She must have moved closer. "What is happening?" Tyson, panic was rising. "He has not even eaten the pie yet. Look at the bowl, Tiffany. It is full." He did not take a single bite. I lay there, letting out a wheezing breath, my body twitching sporadically. This was the moment. This was the confirmation. A loving son would be calling 911. A loving daughter-in-law would be checking my pulse. But they were not doing that. "He did not eat it," Tiffany whispered, and her voice was trembling with a different kind of fear now. "If he dies of a natural heart attack right now, that is fine. That is lucky. But what if he does not die? What if the paramedics come and find the pills in the pie? We have to get rid of it," Tyson said. His voice was frantic. "Flush it. Flush it down the disposal." "No, you idiot," Tiffany snapped. "If we dump it now and he survives, he will wonder why we threw away his dinner. We have to hide it. Put it in the fridge. No, put it in the trash under the other garbage. Quickly." I heard the clatter of the bowl being snatched from the table. I heard footsteps retreating into the kitchen. They were scrambling. They were terrified. Not because I was in pain, not because I was dying on their floor, but because their weapon was still loaded and sitting on the dining room table. "Call 911. Tyson, Tiffany yelled from the kitchen. "You have to call them now. We cannot wait too long or it looks suspicious. Tell them he collapsed. Tell them he has a heart condition." I heard Tyson fumbling with his phone. I let out another long, rattling groan, arching my back. "I am calling," Tyson stammered. "Yes. 911. My dad. He collapsed. I think it is a heart attack. He is shaking. Please hurry." 422. Oak Creek Lane. I lay there and listened to my son perform his own lie. He sounded convincing. He sounded like a grieving, panicked son. It broke the last fragment of hope I had held on to. He was truly gone. The boy I raised was dead. The man standing above me was a stranger who viewed my life as a transaction. Minutes stretched into eternity. I kept up the act, my breathing shallow, my body limp. Tiffany came back into the room. I could hear her pacing. "Why are they not here yet?" she muttered. "If he wakes up Tyson, if he wakes up and talks, we are in trouble. He was acting weird before dinner. Do you think he knew?" "He could not know," Tyson whispered. "How could he know? He is just old. His heart just gave out. It is a coincidence. A lucky coincidence. Lucky. They called my death lucky." Then the sirens cut through the night. The wail grew louder and louder, accompanied by the flashing of red and blue lights that danced across my closed eyelids. The cavalry had arrived. I heard the heavy thud of boots on the porch, the pounding on the front door. In here, Tiffany screamed, her voice shifting instantly into hysterical grief. "Please help him. He just fell." The front door burst open. I heard the rush of movement, the crackle of radios, the smell of antiseptic and rain entering the house. "Sir, can you hear me?" a deep voice asked. Hands were on me, checking my pulse, lifting my eyelids. I let my eyes flutter open just a slit. I saw a blur of uniforms. I saw Tyson and Tiffany standing back, clutching each other, fake tears streaming down Tiffany's face. But the face hovering directly above mine was one I was looking for. It was a large man with a scar above his left eyebrow. He wore the standard EMT uniform, but there was a small, discreet pin on his collar, a gold lion, the insignia of Reggie's private security firm. This was the man. He leaned in close, pretending to check my breathing. His lips barely moved. "Omega Protocol," he whispered so low that only I could hear it. "Reggie sent me. You are safe, Mr. Blackwood." I let out a breath I did not know I was holding. I gave a nearly imperceptible nod. "We have a pulse, but it is erratic," the medic shouted, playing his part perfectly. "We need to move him. Now. Get the stretcher." The team moved with military precision. I was lifted onto the gurney straps secured across my chest. "What is happening? Is he going to make it?" Tyson asked, stepping forward. "We are taking him to St. Jude's," the medic said, firmly blocking Tyson's path with his shoulder. "You can follow in your car, but we need to stabilize him and transport. Do not delay us." "Wait," Tiffany cried out. "I need to get his insurance card. I need to." "We have everything we need on file," the medic interrupted. "We are moving." They wheeled me out into the cool night air. As they lifted the stretcher into the back of the ambulance, I caught one last glimpse of my son and his wife standing in the doorway of that expensive house I had paid for. They looked small. They looked scared. And for the first time all night, they looked like they realized they had lost control. The doors slammed shut, sealing me inside with the medic. The siren wailed and the ambulance lurched forward. The medic looked down at me and pulled the oxygen mask slightly away from my face. "You can relax now, sir," he said. We secured the sample from the kitchen while the police were securing the perimeter. My partner grabbed the bowl from the trash. "We have the evidence." I closed my eyes, letting the tears finally fall. I was alive. I was safe. But as the ambulance sped through the dark streets of Atlanta, I knew the real work was just beginning. I had survived the poison. Now I had to become the poison. The hospital room smelled of bleach and cold air conditioning, a sterile scent that did nothing to mask the underlying odor of sickness. I lay perfectly still in the narrow bed. My eyes closed, my breathing shallow and rhythmic. The wires from the heart monitor tugged gently at my chest, and the machine emitted a steady hypnotic beep that served as the metronome for my performance. Reggie had arranged everything perfectly. The doctor who admitted me was on his payroll, a man who knew how to keep a secret and how to stage a coma. I was supposed to be unconscious, a man hovering between life and death after a massive cardiac event. To anyone watching, I was a vegetable. To the camera hidden in the smoke detector above the bed, I was bait. The heavy door to the room creaked open. I did not flinch. I heard the click of high heels on the linoleum floor. Tiffany. Then the scuff of rubber soles. Tyson. They did not speak at first. They did not rush to my bedside to hold my hand. They did not ask the nurse who had conveniently stepped out if I was going to make it. The silence was heavy, broken only by the rustling of fabric. "Check the door," Tiffany whispered, her voice sharp and impatient. "Make sure nobody is coming." "It is clear," Tyson muttered. I felt a presence loom over me. It was not a comforting presence. It felt like a vulture circling a carcass. I felt hands on my body, but they were not checking for a fever. They were patting down the pockets of my canvas coat, which hung on the back of the chair next to the bed. I heard the Velcro of my wallet ripping open. $40, Tiffany hissed, her tone dripping with contempt. $40 and a Blockbuster card from 2004. Jesus, Tyson, your father lived like a pauper. Where is the rest of it? Where are the bank cards? He keeps cash in a coffee can under the sink, Tyson whispered back. He never trusted banks with his day-to-day money. You know that. Pathetic, she spat. I heard the leather of my wallet being tossed onto the side table. Well, it does not matter. The cash is peanuts compared to the real prize. Get the paper. We need to do this before he wakes up or dies. I lay there, my heart rate remaining steady through sheer force of will, listening to the rustle of stiff paper being unfolded. It sounded like heavy stock official. This is it, Tyson said, his voice trembling slightly. The general power of attorney. I downloaded the template this morning. It gives us control over everything. Medical decisions, real estate, bank accounts. If we get this executed, we can liquidate his assets before the probate courts even get a whiff of a death certificate. But he cannot sign it, Tiffany snapped. Look at him. He is out cold. That is why we brought the ink pad, Tyson said. Section 4, paragraph 3. A signature by mark or fingerprint is valid if the subject is physically unable to sign due to medical incapacity provided it is witnessed. And who is the witness, Tiffany asked. I am, Tyson said. And you are. We will just say he was awake for a second, lucid enough to nod, and we helped him guide his hand. Who is going to argue with the grieving son and daughter-in-law? The logic was terrifyingly sound. It was also highly illegal. I felt the mattress depress as Tiffany sat on the edge of the bed. I focused on keeping my eyelids still fighting the urge to clench my jaw. Give me the pad, she ordered. I felt her hand grab my right wrist. Her skin was cold and clammy. She lifted my arm. It was dead weight, heavy and limp. I made sure of that. She maneuvered my hand toward the small plastic case she must have placed on the bedside table. Open his hand, she commanded Tyson. He is making a fist. I was not making a fist intentionally. It was the natural resting state of a hand that had held hammers and wrenches for 50 years. My joints were stiff with arthritis, something Tyson would have known if he ever bothered to ask how I was doing. Tyson grabbed my fingers and pried them open. He was not gentle. He pulled my index finger and thumb apart, forcing my hand flat. Hold it steady, Tiffany hissed. She grabbed my thumb. She did not just guide it, she twisted it. She bent the joint backward, forcing the pad of my thumb down onto the ink sponge. I felt the wet, cold sensation of the ink. Press harder, she said. We need a clear print. She dug her fingernails into the back of my hand, leveraging her weight to mash my thumb into the ink. The pain was sharp and sudden. She was bending my thumb so far back I felt the tendons strain. It took every ounce of discipline I had learned in the jungles of Vietnam not to recoil, not to snatch my hand back and strike her. I remained a statue. Okay, bring the paper here, she said. I felt the paper brush against my arm. She lifted my inky thumb and slammed it down onto the document. She rolled it side to side, grinding my skin against the fiber of the paper to ensure the ridges of my print transferred. One more, she said, just to be safe. On the second page. She repeated the process. This time she was even rougher. She twisted my wrist at an awkward angle. I felt a pop in my joint. Pain shot up my arm, hot and electric. I let out a low, involuntary groan, a sound that could easily be mistaken for the moan of a dying man. He is making noise, Tyson said, panic rising in his voice. Hurry up. I am hurrying, she snapped. There. Done. She dropped my hand. It flopped onto the sheets, throbbing. I could feel the sticky ink drying on my skin, a mark of their crime. Wipe it off, Tyson said. If the nurse sees the ink, she will know. Use the wet wipes, Tiffany said. She scrubbed my thumb with a rough alcohol-soaked cloth. She did not care if it stung. She rubbed until my skin was raw and red, erasing the evidence from my body. but the evidence on that paper was permanent, and the evidence on the camera recording their every move was eternal. I lay there listening to them shuffle the papers back into a folder. They stood by the foot of the bed looking down at me. I was no longer a person to them. I was a signature. I was a transaction that had just cleared. "So what is the plan now?" Tyson asked, his voice dropping to a conspiratorial whisper. "We wait," Tiffany said. Her voice was calm, chillingly so. "We wait for the doctor to come back. We tell him we have the power of attorney and we want to discuss end-of-life options." "End-of-life options," Tyson repeated. "You mean pulling the plug?" "He is suffering, Tyson," she said, and I could hear the smile in her voice. "Look at him. He is practically gone already. Why drag it out?" We show them the paper, we take control, and we make the compassionate decision to let him go. Then we list the house. "How much do you think we can get for it?" Tyson asked. "I looked up the comps in the neighborhood," Tiffany replied. "The area is gentrifying fast. Developers are buying up these old lots for cash. The house itself is garbage, obviously. It smells like old man and sawdust. But the land, that is a double lot on a corner. We could get $2 million for it easily. Maybe 2.5 if we start a bidding war." $2 million, Tyson breathed. "That clears the debt. That pays off Viper Capital. That buys us the condo in Buckhead." "Exactly," Tiffany said. $2 million, Tyson, and all we have to do is wait for his heart to stop beating. Honestly, he is doing us a favor by dying now. If he had lingered for years, he would have drained that equity with medical bills. This is the best case scenario. I listened to them divvy up my life. They talked about my truck as scrap metal. They talked about my tools as junk to be hauled away. They talked about my home, the home where I had rocked Tyson to sleep as a baby, as nothing more than a dirt lot waiting for a bulldozer. They did not know about the commercial buildings. They did not know about the investment accounts. They did not know that the house they were so eager to sell was already placed in an irrevocable trust for a charity that built schools in developing nations. They knew nothing. And they did not know that the man lying in the bed, the man they were planning to euthanize for a payday, was wide awake. I felt a coldness settle in my chest that had nothing to do with the air conditioning. It was the death of the last shred of fatherly affection I held for Tyson. He was standing there nodding along as his wife planned my execution, salivating over the price tag of my grave. "Okay," Tiffany said, clapping her hands together softly. "Let us go find the doctor. We need to get this moving. Put on your sad face, baby. It is showtime." They walked out of the room, leaving the door slightly ajar. I opened my eyes. I stared at the ceiling tiles, counting the dots. $2 million. That was my price. That was what my life was worth to them. I slowly lifted my right hand. My thumb was red and swollen. There were still traces of black ink in the creases of my fingerprint. I looked at the camera hidden in the smoke detector, and I let my lips curl into a snarl that would have terrified them if they had seen it. They wanted a quick death. They wanted a payout. I was going to give them a payout, all right, but it was not going to be in dollars. It was going to be in suffering. I reached for the nurse call button and pressed it 3 times. The signal for Reggie. It was time to wake up. It was time to come back from the dead and show these children what a real ghost looks like. They wanted the house. They wanted the money. They were going to lose everything. And I was going to enjoy watching it burn. 3 days later, I was wheeled out of St. Jude's Medical Center looking like a shell of a man. Reggie had outdone himself with the paperwork and the medical theater. According to the charts, I had suffered a massive ischemic stroke that left me hemiplegic and aphasic. I sat slumped in the wheelchair, my head lolling heavily to the left, a line of drool carefully engineered with a sip of water trickling from the corner of my slack mouth. My eyes were glassy and unfocused, staring at nothing but seeing everything. Tyson stood at the reception desk signing the final custody papers. He looked exhausted, dark circles under his eyes, but there was a glint of victory in them that made my stomach turn. He had the power of attorney, he had the medical discharge, and now he had the body. He wheeled me out to the curb where his leased BMW was idling. He did not bring my truck. He grunted as he manhandled me into the passenger seat, treating me like a sack of mulch rather than his father. He did not even bother to buckle my seatbelt. As we drove, I watched the familiar streets of my neighborhood pass by. I expected him to turn left onto Oak Creek Lane toward my house, toward my sanctuary and my things. Instead, he turned right, heading for the highway. We were going to the suburbs. We were going to his house. He was not taking me home to recover. He was taking me to prison. When we pulled into his driveway, Tiffany was waiting on the porch. She did not look happy to see me. She looked at me with open revulsion, crossing her arms over her chest as Tyson dragged me out of the car. He practically carried me to the front door, his breathing heavy and labored. I made myself dead weight, letting my limbs hang loose and heavy. "Do not bring him in here," Tiffany snapped, blocking the entrance with her body. "I just had the carpets cleaned, Tyson. If he has an accident on the rug, I will kill you. He smells like hospital and old age." "Where am I supposed to put him?" Tyson asked, struggling to keep me upright. "The guest room is set up for your mother when she visits. Put him downstairs." "The basement," Tyson said. "It is unfinished, Tiff. It is freezing down there. It is 50 degrees. "Put a space heater down there," she said, waving her hand dismissively. "He is paralyzed, Tyson. He will not know the difference. Besides, it is easier to clean up the mess on concrete than it is on hardwood. Just get him out of my sight." Tyson sighed, but he did not argue. He dragged me through the kitchen past the warmth of the oven and the smell of roasting chicken and opened the narrow door to the basement. A blast of cold, damp air hit my face. It smelled of wet earth, rotting cardboard, and neglect. The stairs were steep and wooden. He half carried, half slid me down into the darkness. He deposited me in the corner of the room on a stained mattress that looked like it had been dragged in from the curb. There were no windows. The walls were bare cinder block, weeping with moisture. In the corner, a sump pump hummed intermittently, a mechanical heartbeat in the gloom. He threw a thin, scratchy wool blanket over me. It smelled of mothballs and dog hair. "Stay here, Dad," he muttered, not meeting my eyes. "I will bring you some food later." He turned and ran up the stairs, slamming the door behind him. The lock clicked. I was alone in the dark, while above me, I could hear the muffled sounds of their life. The television blaring, the clinking of wine glasses, the laughter. They were celebrating my incarceration in the dungeon of a house I was paying for. I waited until I was certain they were settled for the night. The floorboards above ceased their creaking and the house settled into silence. Slowly I sat up. I wiped the fake drool from my chin and stretched my neck, rolling my shoulders to work out the stiffness from hours of playing the cripple. The cold was biting, seeping through the thin hospital gown and the flannel shirt Tyson had hastily dressed me in. I reached into the hidden pocket sewn into the lining of my pants, a modification I had made years ago for carrying large sums of cash on job sites. I pulled out a small black device no larger than a pack of gum. It was a high-fidelity voice recorder capable of capturing a whisper from across a room. I pressed the record button and set it on a crate beside the mattress, hiding it under a pile of old newspapers. Then I pulled out my phone, shielding the screen's glow with the blanket. I had 1 bar of signal. Enough. I opened my secure messaging app and typed a message to Reggie. "The Eagle has landed. Conditions are subhuman. Proceed with Phase 2. Freeze their assets tomorrow morning. I want them to wake up to a declined card." I put the phone away and lay back down on the filthy mattress. I stared up at the exposed floor joists of the main level. I could see the plumbing pipes, the electrical wiring, the guts of the house. I knew exactly how this house was built because I had reviewed the inspection report when Tyson bought it. I knew where the weak points were. I knew where the leaks would start. I closed my eyes, but I did not sleep. I listened. I recorded. And I plotted. They thought they had buried me in the dark. They did not realize they had just planted a seed. And tomorrow the roots would start to strangle them. The rumble of the garage door opening and the subsequent fade of the BMW engine down the street was my signal. I lay still for exactly 3 minutes, counting the seconds in my head, just as I used to count the cure time on concrete. When I was certain they were gone, I sat up. My back screamed in protest from the cold floor, but I ignored it. The frail stroke victim vanished. In his place stood Cyrus Blackwood, master contractor. I walked to the basement stairs, my steps silent and sure. The door at the top was locked, a simple privacy knob meant to keep toddlers and unwanted guests out. Tyson had never been handy. He did not understand that a lock is only as strong as the frame it sits in. I found a stiff piece of wire in a box of discarded Christmas ornaments in the corner. I bent the tip into a small hook. I ascended the stairs and knelt by the keyhole. It took me less than 10 seconds. I felt the tumblers shift the spring compress. With a soft click, the knob turned. I pushed the door open and stepped into the kitchen. The house was quiet. I moved quickly, avoiding the creaky floorboards I had noted during my previous forced entry. My target was the home office down the hall. The door was solid oak, a veneer of quality hiding cheap particle board. It was locked too. I pulled a thin plastic loyalty card from my hidden pocket. I slid it between the door and the jamb, feeling for the latch bolt. I applied pressure, angled the card, and pushed. The door popped open. I was in. I sat down in Tyson's oversized leather executive chair. It squeaked under my weight. The desk was a disaster zone, a chaotic sprawl of unopened envelopes and crumpled paper. It was the workspace of a man drowning. I started with the stack of mail on the left. Past due. Final notice. Collections. I pushed those aside and found a manila envelope buried under a pile of car magazines. I opened it. Inside was a letter from the bank where Tyson claimed to be a vice president. It was a termination notice dated 2 years ago. He had not been laid off. He had been fired for gross negligence and failure to follow compliance protocols. 2 years. He had been waking up every morning, putting on a suit, and leaving the house to pretend to work for 2 years. I felt a pang of pity that was quickly extinguished by the next document I found. It was a credit card statement for a Platinum Amex. The balance was staggering. $80,000. I found another for a Visa, $50,000. In total, I found statements for 6 different cards. The total debt was nearly $300,000. I scanned the transaction logs. It was a catalog of narcissism. $3,000 for a handbag at Louis Vuitton, $500 for a dinner at Nobu, weekend trips to resorts in the Caribbean, spa treatments, leased luxury cars. They were living like royalty on borrowed dimes. They were not just broke, they were destitute, they were insolvent, and they were funding this charade by bleeding me dry. I opened the bottom drawer of the desk. It was locked, but the mechanism was cheap zinc. I braced my foot against the desk leg and gave the drawer a sharp yank. The wood splintered and the drawer slid open. Inside, there was a single red folder. The label on the tab sent a jolt of recognition through me. Viper Capital. I knew that name. I knew it very well. I opened the folder and my breath hitched in my throat. It was a high-interest, short-term loan agreement, a hard money loan. $50,000 cash with an interest rate that bordered on criminal, weekly compounding, aggressive collection clauses. It was the kind of loan you took when the banks laughed you out of the room. But it was the collateral section that made my vision blur with red rage. Listed there in black and white was the property address, 422 Oak Creek Lane, my house, my paid-off home. And at the bottom of the page was a signature, Cyrus Blackwood. It was a forgery, a shaky, pathetic attempt to mimic the signature I had used on Tyson's report cards and birthday checks. They had stolen my identity. They had mortgaged the roof over my head to a predatory lender to pay for their vanity. They had signed my name to a contract that could leave me homeless. I traced the ink of the forgery with my finger. It was recent. They must have done this weeks ago. This was why they needed me dead. The first payment was likely due, and they had no way to pay it without my life insurance. I closed the folder. My hands were steady now. The anger had crystallized into something cold and hard. They had made a deal with the devil. They just did not know that the devil was standing in their office. I pulled my phone from my pocket the moment I heard the office door click shut behind me. My hand was steady, but my heart hammered against my ribs like a sledgehammer striking iron. I dialed Reggie. He answered on the first ring, his voice crisp and professional. "Status?" he asked. "Viper Capital," I said, keeping my voice low. "They owe Viper Capital 50 grand, and they used my house as collateral with a forged signature on a high-interest note." There was a pause on the line, then a low, dry chuckle that sounded like dry leaves scraping together. "Reggie, what is funny?" I asked, irritation spiking. "Cyrus," he said, "you really do not look at the quarterly reports for the Diversified Risk Fund, do you?" "I pay you to look at them," I snapped. "Viper Capital is a shell company for Blackwood Holdings," Reggie said. "We acquired their portfolio 6 months ago as a distressed asset. It is your money, Cyrus. You are lending money to yourself." The irony hit me like a physical blow. I almost laughed. My son was stealing from me to pay a loan shark that was actually me. I was the predator and the prey. So I own the debt, I asked, just to be sure. "You own the debt, you own the paper, and you own the sharks," Reggie confirmed. "Good," I said, feeling a cold smile stretch across my face. "Take off the leash. I want you to have the collection team call Tyson. Use the scary voice. Tell him the note has been called. Tell him he has 24 hours to pay the full 50,000 or they are seizing assets." "And Reggie?" "Yes, boss." Tell him personal safety cannot be guaranteed. That is brutal, Cyrus. Reggie noted. He tried to kill me with sweet potato pie, Reggie, I said. Brutal is just the beginning. I made my way back down to the basement just minutes before I heard the garage door rumble open. I arranged myself on the mattress, adjusting my limbs into the familiar broken posture of the stroke victim. I let my mouth go slack and stared blankly at the damp cinder block wall. Above me, I heard the heavy footsteps of Tyson and the sharp click of Tiffany's heels. They were arguing before they even fully entered the house. "We have to sell the jewelry," Tyson was saying, his voice high and tight. "It is the only way." "We are not selling my jewelry," Tiffany shrieked. "Those are my assets." Then the phone rang. Not the house phone. Tyson's cell. It rang loud and shrill, cutting through their argument like a knife. The silence that followed was heavy. "Hello," Tyson answered. His voice was small, trembling. I listened as the color likely drained from his face. I could imagine the voice on the other end. Reggie's head of security, a man named Marcus, who sounded like gravel grinding in a blender. "What do you mean, immediately?" Tyson squeaked. "The contract said no, please. I need more time." "My father, he is." He listened for a moment, then gasped a sound of pure terror. "Tonight, I cannot get 50,000 by tonight. Please, we have a house. It is worth 2 million. We just need to liquidate." He was cut off. The call ended. I heard a sound like a phone being dropped onto a granite counter. "They called the note," Tyson whispered. His voice carried through the floorboards, thin and terrified. "Viper. They said the signature looks suspect. They said they are auditing the collateral. They want the cash, Tiffany. Tonight. Or they are sending a team." "A team." Tiffany's voice pitched up an octave. "Like hitmen. Like breakers," Tyson said. "They said personal safety is not guaranteed." "Oh my God." "They know about the forgery. If they find out the house is not mine legally yet, they will kill us. We are dead. We are actually dead." "Shut up," Tiffany yelled. "Stop panic spiraling. We need money. Where can we get money?" "We do not have any," Tyson screamed back. "You spent it all. The credit cards are maxed. The bank accounts are overdrawn. We have nothing." The argument exploded. It was a symphony of blame. "This is your fault," Tyson yelled. "You had to have the Mercedes. You had to have the renovation. You bled me dry." "My fault," Tiffany screeched. "You are the one who lost his job 2 years ago and was too much of a coward to tell anyone. You are the one pretending to be a banker while you play video games at Starbucks. I am the one keeping up appearances. Appearances do not pay the shark." I heard stomping. The basement door flew open. Light flooded down the stairs, blinding me. Tyson stomped down the wooden steps, his face red and sweaty, his eyes wild. Tiffany followed him, looking like a cornered rat. They stood over me. I did not move. I did not blink. "Look at him," Tyson spat, kicking the mattress near my leg. "Just lying there, useless. He has millions in equity sitting in that house, and he is just breathing air." "He is the reason we are in this mess," Tiffany hissed. She leaned down, her face inches from mine. I could smell the wine on her breath. "If you had just died," she whispered, her voice venomous. "If you had just had the decency to die in that hospital bed, we would be rich right now. We would be safe." She slapped my cheek. It was not a hard slap, but it was stinging. It was disrespectful. "Do something," she screamed at my unmoving face. Die, so we can sell your house." Tyson grabbed her arm. "Stop it. He does not understand. He is a vegetable. He is a stubborn old mule," she said, straightening up, "and he is going to get us killed." "Maybe," Tyson said, looking at me with a dark, desperate glint in his eyes that I had never seen before. "Maybe he can still help us, just not the way he intended." "What do you mean?" Tiffany asked. "If Viper wants money," Tyson muttered, staring at my chest, "maybe we can give them something worth money. Or maybe we just need him to disappear so we can claim the insurance faster. No more waiting for nature. We need to accelerate the timeline." They looked at each other. The fear in the room shifted. It was not just panic anymore. It was resolve. They turned and went back up the stairs, locking the door behind them. I lay in the dark, my cheeks still stinging from her slap. They thought they were trapped. They did not know they were locked in a cage with the zookeeper, and I had just decided it was feeding time. The air in the basement grew heavy, not just with the damp chill of the earth, but with the suffocating weight of desperation. Tyson and Tiffany had returned. They paced the small concrete square like caged animals, their shadows dancing frantically against the cinder blocks under the single flickering bulb. The threat from the collection agency had cracked something vital inside them. Civilization was peeling away layer by layer, leaving behind raw, primal fear. Tyson was muttering to himself, gnawing on his fingernails until they bled. 50,000. We need 50,000 by morning or they send the breakers. We are dead, Tiffany. We are dead. Tiffany stopped pacing. She stood over me, her silhouette looming large and distorted. She looked at my unmoving body with a cold, clinical detachment that was far more terrifying than her earlier rage. She was no longer angry. She was calculating. She was appraising me not as a father-in-law, but as a collection of biological assets. We are not dead, Tyson, she said, her voice devoid of emotion. We just need to be creative. We have a resource right here that we are not utilizing. Tyson looked at her, confused. What do you mean? The house. We cannot sell the house without his signature, and the forgery will take too long to process if Viper is watching. Not the house, you idiot, she snapped. Him. The meat. Tyson recoiled as if she had physically struck him. What are you talking about? Tiffany crouched down, her face inches from mine. I could smell the stale wine and the sharp metallic tang of her fear. I heard a story once, she whispered, her eyes darting over my body. My friend in med school knew a guy. They pay top dollar for viable organs in Mexico. Kidneys, livers, corneas, even skin grafts. He is old, but he is healthy. His heart is weak, sure, but the rest of him is worth money. Tyson gagged. You want to chop him up? You want to sell my father for parts? Are you insane, Tiff? That is monster talk. Tiffany stood up and backhanded him across the face. The sound was loud and wet, echoing off the concrete walls. Tyson stumbled back, clutching his cheek. Wake up, she screamed. There are men coming to break our legs and burn this house down. Do you think they care about morality? Do you think they care about your daddy issues? We are talking about survival, Tyson. Us or him. And look at him. She kicked the mattress by my head. He is a vegetable. He is checking out anyway. We are just recycling. We drive him across the border tonight. I make a call. We hand him over. We come back with 50 grand in cash. The debt is gone. We are free, and nobody will ever know. We just say he wandered off. We say the stroke made him confused and he got lost in the woods. It happens all the time. Tyson looked from her to me. I saw the battle in his eyes, the last shred of his conscience fighting against his cowardice. He looked at my gray face, my slack jaw, my lifeless limbs. He looked at his wife, the woman who controlled his every breath. Then he looked at the door where the imaginary hitmen were waiting. He slumped his shoulders. How do we get him there? He whispered, his voice broken. We load him in the trunk, Tiffany said, a cruel smile spreading across her face, just like luggage. I lay there and felt the last tether of familial bond snap. It did not break with a bang, but with a silent, mournful sigh. They were not just greedy. They were not just entitled. They were predators. They had crossed the line from bad children to monsters. The sweet potato pie had been an attempt at a clean, quiet murder, a mercy killing in their twisted minds. But this was butchery. This was desecration. They were planning to hollow me out like a pumpkin and sell the seeds. I realized then that my plan to simply scare them, to teach them a lesson about money and gratitude, was insufficient. You do not teach a lesson to a rabid dog. You put it down. This was no longer a game of chess. This was war, total and absolute. I felt the cold concrete against my back and made a silent vow to the son I had once loved. You want to sell me for parts, Tyson? You want to trade my life for your freedom? I am going to strip you of everything. I am going to take your freedom, your future, and your name. You will wish the hitmen had found you. You will wish you had never opened that basement door. I closed my eyes and slowed my breathing, waiting for them to leave to make their preparations. They thought I was the cargo. They did not know I was the bomb, and the timer had just hit 0. The transition from the tomb of the basement to the main floor was jarring, not because of the warmth, but because of the noise. The house was vibrating with the heavy bass of music that did not belong in a residential neighborhood, and the air was thick with the smell of cheap cologne and desperation. Tyson and Tiffany had dragged me up the stairs an hour earlier. They had stripped off my hospital gown and forced my stiff limbs into an old suit of mine they had dug out of storage. It was moth-eaten and smelled of cedar and neglect, but it was necessary for their charade. They planted me in a wheelchair they must have rented or stolen and parked me in the corner of the living room like a piece of avant-garde furniture. I sat there, my head lolling to the side, my eyes half open, observing the carnival of vultures they had invited into my home. These were not friends. These were not neighbors coming to offer casseroles and condolences. These were sharks. I recognized the type immediately from my years in the business. Hard money lenders looking for a quick flip, unlicensed real estate wholesalers who preyed on distress, pawn shop owners who did not ask for receipts. Tyson and Tiffany were hosting a fire sale and I was the inventory. They were desperate to raise the $50,000 for Viper Capital before the sun came up, and they were willing to sell anything that was not nailed down, including the deed to my house, which lay on the coffee table amidst a sea of empty beer bottles and half-eaten appetizers. I watched Tyson work the room. He was sweating through his shirt, his eyes darting nervously toward the door every few minutes, expecting the hitmen to kick it down. He was trying to sell my tools, my truck, and even the copper wiring out of the walls to a man with a gold tooth and a snakeskin jacket. "I will give you $5,000 for the truck and the tools," the man said, laughing as he tapped ash onto the carpet. $5,000, Tyson squeaked. "The truck alone is worth 20. "Not without a title and not fast," the man sneered. "You want cash tonight or do you want to negotiate?" Tyson took the cash. My heart burned, but I did not move. But the real horror was Tiffany. She was holding court by the fireplace, wearing a dress that was far too short and holding a glass of wine that was far too full. She was introducing me to people not as her father-in-law, but as an asset. "This is the golden goose," she slurred, gesturing to me with her glass. "The doctors say he could go any day now. Stroke took out everything upstairs. He is just a body waiting for a signature." A man I did not recognize walked over to me. He was wearing a suit that cost more than Tyson made in a year, but he wore it like a costume. He smelled of expensive scotch and rot. He leaned down, his face inches from mine. I could see the broken capillaries in his nose. "So this is the old man holding up the deal," he said, blowing smoke into my face. He poked me in the chest hard with a finger adorned with a heavy gold ring. "Hey, Pops! You in there? Can you hear me?" I stared past him, my gaze fixed on a water stain on the ceiling. I let a line of drool escape my lips. "Gross!" The man laughed, straightening up. He looked at Tiffany. "You said he was compliant. He looks disgusting. He is harmless." Tiffany laughed, walking over. "Watch." She stood in front of me. The room went quiet. The sharks smelled blood. They wanted to see the show. They wanted to see just how broken the old man was. Tiffany dipped her finger into her wine glass and flicked red droplets onto my face. "Wake up, Cyrus," she sang. "It is a party." The guests laughed. It was a cruel braying sound. Encouraged, she took a sip of wine and then deliberately tilted her glass. A stream of dark red liquid poured onto the lap of my suit, soaking through the fabric, staining the white shirt underneath. It looked like a gunshot wound. It looked like blood. "Oops," she giggled, pretending to cover her mouth. My hand slipped. "Look at him. He does not even care. He likes it. He is probably thirsty." She poured the rest of the glass over my head. The wine ran down my forehead into my eyes, stinging and blurring my vision. It dripped off my nose and chin onto the floor. I sat there drenched in alcohol and humiliation while 20 strangers laughed at my degradation. "Someone snap a picture," the man in the snakeskin jacket yelled. "Send it to the nursing home. Tell them he comes pre-marinated." Tyson stood in the corner watching. He did not laugh, but he did not step forward either. He took a long drink from his bottle and looked away, unable to watch his wife baptize his father in mockery. He was a coward, a complicit, spineless coward. I did not wipe the wine from my eyes. I did not blink. I let the liquid sting. I let it burn, because that burn was fuel. I used the blur of the wine to mask the movement of my eyes as I scanned the room. I was not a vegetable. I was a camera. I was a recording device. I was cataloging every face in that room. I memorized the man with the gold tooth. I knew him. He ran a chop shop in the South District. I memorized the man in the expensive suit. He was a disbarred lawyer known for facilitating fraudulent deed transfers. I memorized the woman in the corner eyeing my grandmother's china cabinet. She was a fence for stolen antiques. This was not a party. It was a gathering of the criminal underground, and my son had invited them into our lives. Every laugh, every insult, every drop of wine was being filed away in the steel trap of my mind. They thought they were mocking a helpless old man. They did not know they were providing a deposition for their own prosecution. I watched Tiffany refill her glass. She was glowing with the power of her cruelty. She felt untouchable. She thought she had won. She thought that by dehumanizing me, she made it easier to sell me off piece by piece. She did not realize that she was stripping away the last of my mercy. I focused on Tyson. I watched him take the envelope of cash from the chop shop owner. $5,000 for a lifetime of hard work. He shoved it into his pocket looking sick. He knew this was wrong. He knew this was evil. But he did it anyway. That was his sin. The sin of weakness. I sat in my puddle of wine and watched the clock on the mantel. It was almost midnight. The deadline for the Viper Capital payment was approaching. The desperation in the room was about to spike. And that is when he would walk in. Reggie. I had timed the text perfectly earlier. I knew he would be waiting outside, watching the house, waiting for the signal to make his entrance. The stage was set. The villains were drunk and distracted. The victim was properly bloodied and bowed. It was time for the hero to arrive, not to save the day, but to close the trap. I looked at Tiffany one last time, laughing, spilling, preening. Enjoy the party, my dear, I thought. Drink deep, because the hangover you are going to have tomorrow will last for the rest of your life. You wanted to play with the big boys. You wanted to swim with sharks. Well, you are about to find out that there is something in the water much bigger and much hungrier than you. And he is sitting right in front of you, covered in wine, waiting for the bell to ring. The front door did not open with a knock or a ring. It swung inward with a heavy, deliberate slowness that commanded silence before the man even crossed the threshold. The bass from the stereo seemed to die in his presence. The chatter of the vultures ceased. Reggie King stepped into the foyer like a storm front rolling over a cornfield. He was not wearing the comfortable sweaters he usually wore when we played chess on Tuesdays. Tonight he was dressed in a charcoal three-piece suit that cost more than the car sitting in the driveway. He wore a long wool overcoat that made his shoulders look as wide as a doorway, and his face was set in a mask of stone-cold indifference. He looked like what he was, a man who moved millions with a phone call and buried bodies with a signature. I watched from my wine-soaked wheelchair as the atmosphere in the room shifted from a chaotic flea market to a funeral parlor. The low-rent criminals Tyson had invited knew the scent of an alpha predator. The man with the gold tooth grabbed his jacket and slipped out the back door without a word. The fence for the antiques suddenly found her phone very interesting. Reggie ignored them all. His eyes locked onto Tyson, who was standing by the fireplace clutching a bottle of beer like a lifeline. Reggie walked across the room, his footsteps heavy and rhythmic on the hardwood floor. He stopped 3 feet from my son. He did not look at me. He did not look at Tiffany. He looked at Tyson with the kind of boredom a lion reserves for a limping gazelle. I understand there is a distressed asset for sale, Reggie said, his voice a deep baritone that rumbled in my chest. A residential property. Double lot. Immediate occupancy. Cash terms. Tyson stammered, his eyes wide. Who are you? Did Viper send you? I am the solution, Reggie said simply. I represent a private equity firm looking to expand its portfolio in this district. We heard there was a motivated seller. Are you motivated, Mr. Blackwood? Tyson looked at Tiffany. She had scrambled off the sofa, smoothing her dress, trying to regain some semblance of control. She stepped forward, her eyes hungry. We are very motivated, she said, her voice shrill. But we have offers. We have a lot of interest. Reggie did not even blink. He did not look at her. He kept his gaze on Tyson. I do not deal with brokers. I do not deal with wives. I deal with the man on the deed. Is that you? Technically, Tyson said, swallowing hard. Technically, it is my father. He gestured to me. But I have power of attorney. Reggie finally glanced my way. His eyes passed over my wine-stained face, my slumped posture. He gave a small, almost imperceptible nod. Good enough, he said. He lifted the black leather briefcase he was carrying in his left hand. He set it down on the coffee table, sweeping aside the empty beer bottles and the half-eaten tray of cheese with his forearm. The clatter of glass falling to the floor made Tyson jump. Reggie thumbed the latches. They clicked open with a sound like a pistol cocking. He lifted the lid. The silence in the room was absolute. Inside the briefcase, stacked in neat, tight rows, were bundles of $100 bills. It was $50,000. It was the exact amount they needed to pay off the loan shark. It was the exact amount they needed to save their lives. To them, it looked like salvation. To me, it looked like bait. I saw the light go out of Tyson's eyes, replaced by a dull, animalistic greed. He took a step forward, his hand reaching out involuntarily. Tiffany let out a small gasp, her hand covering her mouth, her eyes reflecting the green of the money. They were mesmerized. They were drunk on the sight of it. They forgot to ask who Reggie really was. They forgot to ask why a stranger would show up with cash at midnight. They forgot caution. They forgot fear. All they saw was the exit sign. Is that... Tyson whispered, his voice dry. $50,000, Reggie said. Cash. Non-consecutive serial numbers. No banks. No waiting periods. I take the deed tonight, you take the cash tonight. The debt is gone. The problem is solved. I watched Tiffany. She was practically vibrating. She looked at the money, then she looked at me. I could see the gears turning in her head. She was already spending it. She was already planning the next lie, the next scam. She did not care about the house. She did not care about me. She just wanted the immediate fix. We will take it, she said, stepping in front of Tyson. We accept. Where do we sign? Reggie pulled a single sheet of paper from the inside pocket of his coat. He placed it on the table next to the money. It was a dense document covered in fine print. He produced a heavy fountain pen and set it down on the paper. The owner signs, Reggie said, right there on the bottom line. But he cannot write, Tyson said, his eyes tearing away from the money for a second. He had a stroke. His hands do not work. Reggie stared at him. Then use his thumb. A fingerprint is legal binding in the state of Georgia for incapacitated grantors provided it is witnessed. I will witness. You will witness. Reggie reached into his pocket and pulled out a small red ink pad. He tossed it onto the table. It slid across the wood and stopped right in front of Tyson. Do it, Reggie commanded. Do it now, or the briefcase closes and I walk out that door. And I promise you the next man who walks through that door will not be bringing money. He will be bringing a baseball bat. Tyson flinched. The threat of the breakers was still fresh in his mind. He looked at the money. He looked at the ink pad. He looked at me. I sat motionless, letting the drool pool on my collar. I made no sound. I offered no resistance. Tyson grabbed the ink pad. He rushed over to me, dragging the coffee table closer with his foot so the document was within reach. He grabbed my hand. His palms were sweating. He was trembling so hard his teeth were chattering. Sorry, Dad, he muttered, but he did not look me in the eye. I have to do this. It is for us. It is for the family. He grabbed my thumb. He did not twist it this time. He did not need to be cruel. He just needed to be fast. He pressed my thumb into the red ink. It felt wet and cold. He dragged my hand over to the document. Right there, Reggie said, pointing to the line. Press hard. Make it legible. Tyson pushed my thumb down onto the paper. He leaned his weight into it, grinding my skin against the fiber, ensuring a perfect impression. I felt the paper beneath my skin. I knew what it was. It was not a deed of sale. It was a confession. It was a waiver of all rights and an acceptance of full criminal liability for fraud, embezzlement, and attempted murder. It was a document Reggie and I had drafted days ago, and Tyson, in his greed and panic, was too blind to read a single word of it. He just saw the line. He just saw the money. He lifted my hand. A perfect red fingerprint sat on the page like a bloodstain. Done, Tyson said, breathless. It is done. Reggie picked up the paper. He blew on the ink to dry it. He folded it carefully and placed it back in his pocket. Yes, Reggie said, his voice dropping an octave. It is done. He closed the briefcase. He latched it, but he did not push it toward Tyson. He kept his hand on the handle. Tyson reached for it. Okay, hand it over. Reggie did not move. He just stood there looming over my son, a dark tower of judgment. The room felt suddenly very small and very cold. There is just one thing, Reggie said. A small technicality. What technicality? Tiffany snapped. We signed. Give us the money. Reggie looked at me. For the first time since he entered the room, he looked me directly in the eyes. He smiled. It was not a nice smile. The technicality, Reggie said, is that the owner has to be incapacitated. And I do not think he is. Tyson frowned. What are you talking about? He is a vegetable. Look at him. Reggie shook his head slowly. No, I think he is just disappointed. I slowly lifted my head. I blinked the wine out of my eyes. I wiped the drool from my chin with the sleeve of my ruined suit jacket. I sat up straight, pushing my shoulders back, feeling the stiffness crack in my spine. The transformation was instant. The broken old man vanished. The tycoon returned. I looked at Tyson. I looked at Tiffany. Their faces went slack with shock. Tiffany dropped her wine glass. It shattered on the floor, but nobody looked at it. They were staring at me. I cleared my throat. It was a rough sound like gravel sliding down a chute. "You really should read the fine print, son," I said, my voice steady and strong. "That ink is going to be very hard to wash off in prison." The single sheet of paper lying on the coffee table between the half-empty beer bottles and the open briefcase of cash was a masterpiece of legal entrapment. To the untrained eye, or to the eye blinded by greed and panic, it looked like a standard quitclaim deed, a boring piece of administrative paperwork necessary to transfer a property title. But I knew every syllable written on that page because I had spent 3 sleepless nights drafting it with Reggie. The header did not say property transfer agreement. It was written in a font size just small enough to require reading glasses, which Tyson in his vanity refused to wear. It read voluntary relinquishment of inheritance and admission of criminal liability. Paragraph 1 was a full confession to the attempted poisoning on Christmas Eve, detailed down to the dosage of beta blockers ground into the sweet potato pie. Paragraph 2 outlined the conspiracy to defraud a senior citizen through the use of forged loan documents with Viper Capital. Paragraph 3 was the kicker. It was a clause that stated the signatory accepted full personal responsibility for all debts incurred by the Blackwood estate, effectively transferring his own bad loans back onto himself while stripping him of any future claim to my assets. It was not a sale. It was a suicide note for his financial and legal life. And it was sitting right there in plain sight, illuminated by the gaudy chandelier Tiffany had bought with my stolen money. All Tyson had to do was read it. If he read the first sentence, he would know the game was rigged. If he read the fine print, he would know that Reggie was not a savior, but an executioner. But he was not reading. He was staring at the stacks of $100 bills in the briefcase, his pupils dilated so wide they swallowed his irises. He saw salvation. He saw a way out of the hole he had dug. He did not see the trap snapping shut around his ankle. He did not see that the paper was not a ticket to freedom, but a one-way pass to a federal penitentiary. Tyson grabbed the red ink pad, his movements jerky and uncoordinated. He looked like a junkie reaching for a fix. He dragged the coffee table closer, the legs screeching against the hardwood floor, a sound that made the few remaining party guests flinch. He did not look at me. He could not bring himself to look at the face of the father he was about to betray for the second time in a week. He grabbed my wrist. His hands were clammy cold with sweat, yet burning with a feverish energy. He squeezed hard, harder than necessary. It was not the grip of a son holding a father. It was the grip of a butcher handling a piece of meat. He pulled my arm toward the table. I let it go limp, a dead weight. I wanted him to feel the heaviness of it. I wanted him to feel the burden of what he was doing. He jammed my thumb onto the red ink pad. He pressed down with his other hand, mashing my skin into the sponge until the ink seeped into the cuticles. It felt wet and cold like fresh blood. He lifted my hand and hovered it over the signature line. His breath was coming in short, ragged gasps. "Just one print," he muttered to himself, his voice barely audible. "Just one print and it is over. We take the money. We pay Viper. We start over." He was lying to himself. There was no starting over. There was only the end. He positioned my thumb over the line designated for the grantor. He did not notice that the line was actually labeled defendant. He did not notice that the witness line Reggie had already signed was labeled federal informant. He saw nothing but the finish line. He pushed my hand down. He leaned his body weight into it, forcing my thumb flat against the paper, rolling it slightly from left to right, just as he had seen in movies to get a clean print. The paper crinkled slightly under the pressure. I could feel the grain of the table through the document. I could feel the tremor in his hand, the vibration of his terror traveling through his arm and into mine. He held it there for a second, 2 seconds, 3 seconds, making sure the mark was indelible. He was sealing his fate with my hand. He was selling his soul and using my thumbprint as the receipt. He began to lift my hand away from the paper. He let out a long, shuddering sigh of relief, the sound of a man who thinks he has just survived a firing squad. "Got it," he whispered. "It is perfect." He started to pull away, to drop my hand back onto the armrest of the wheelchair so he could grab the money. But my hand did not drop. My hand did not go limp. As he tried to pull back, my fingers curled. Slowly, deliberately. They wrapped around his wrist. It was not a twitch. It was not a spasm. It was a vice. I clamped down with the grip strength of a man who had bent conduit pipe and hauled compressors for 40 years. My calloused fingers dug into the soft flesh of his forearm, finding the pressure points compressing the nerves. Tyson froze. He looked down at his wrist, his brain unable to process what was happening. He tugged slightly, thinking it was just a reflex. My grip tightened. I squeezed until I felt his radius and ulna grind together. He let out a high-pitched yelp of pain and confusion. "What the?" he stammered. He looked up. He looked at my face. And that is when the true horror hit him. I opened my eyes. I did not flutter them open. I snapped them open wide and alert. The glassy, vacant stare of the stroke victim was gone. In its place was a gaze of pure, unadulterated fury, a gaze that burned with the intensity of a welding torch. I locked eyes with him. I saw his pupils contract. I saw the color drain from his face, instantly leaving him gray and ashy. His mouth opened, but no sound came out. He was paralyzed by a fear so primal it hijacked his nervous system. The room went dead silent. Tiffany, who had been reaching for the briefcase, froze her hand, hovering in midair. Reggie stood like a statue, his face grim and satisfied. I slowly lifted my head from the back of the wheelchair. I cracked my neck first to the left, then to the right, the sound of the vertebrae popping echoing like gunshots in the quiet room. I sat up straight, shedding the slump of the invalid, shedding the weakness I had worn as a disguise. I pulled Tyson closer to me, jerking him down until his face was inches from mine. I could smell the stale beer on his breath. I could see the red veins in his eyes. He was trembling so violently that he was shaking the wheelchair. I held him there, trapped in my grip, trapped in my gaze. I looked down at the paper on the table, at the bright red thumbprint that sat there like a scarlet letter. Then I looked back at him. I did not shout. I did not scream. I spoke in a voice that was low gravelly and terrifyingly steady. "Make sure it is legible, son," I said, my voice filling the room. "That ink is going to be very hard to wash off where you are going." Tyson let out a sound that was half sob, half scream. He tried to yank his arm away, but I held him fast. I was the anchor, and he was the drowning man. "You thought I was asleep," I hissed, leaning closer. "You thought I was gone, but I was watching you. I was listening to you. I heard you sell me to the chop shop. I heard you plan to dump me in Mexico, and I felt you press my thumb onto your own death warrant." "Dad," he whispered, his voice cracking. "Dad, please. I am not your father," I said, releasing his wrist with a shove that sent him stumbling back into the coffee table. "I am the landlord, and eviction time is now." I gripped the armrests of the wheelchair, my knuckles turning white, not from strain but from the sheer force I was exerting to keep from snapping my son's neck. The metal of the chair groaned under my hands, a sharp metallic screech that cut through the dead silence of the room. I planted my feet flat on the hardwood floor. I pushed down. My quadriceps, which Tyson assumed were atrophied from age and stroke, engaged with the power of a hydraulic press. I rose. It was not a struggle. It was not the shaky ascent of an invalid. It was a slow, deliberate unfolding of height and power. I kept rising until I stood at my full 6'3", towering over the room like a monolith. I looked down at the wheelchair that had been my prison cell for the last week. With a casual flick of my boot, I kicked it. The chair skittered across the floor, spinning wildly until it crashed into the wall with a deafening clatter of steel and plastic. I reached for the lapels of the moth-eaten suit jacket Tiffany had forced me into. It was soaked in cheap wine and reeked of their disrespect. I grabbed the fabric in my fists. With a sudden, violent motion, I ripped it open. The buttons popped off, pinging against the floorboards and hitting the coffee table like hail. I shrugged the heavy, wet fabric off my shoulders, letting it drop to the ground in a sodden heap. I tore at the stained dress shirt underneath, ripping the buttons from the placket until it hung open. Underneath, I was wearing a tactical vest and a fitted charcoal dress shirt that Reggie had brought me in the ambulance. I adjusted my cuffs. I straightened my collar. I ran a hand over my head, smoothing back my gray hair. I rolled my shoulders back, feeling the vertebrae crack into alignment. The transformation was absolute. The stooped, drooling stroke victim was gone. In his place stood Cyrus Blackwood, the man who had built skyscrapers from mud and negotiated deals with men far more dangerous than these suburban parasites. The sound of Tiffany's wine glass hitting the floor was like a gunshot. The crystal shattered, sending shards of glass and red wine exploding across her pristine white heels. She did not look down. She did not flinch. Her eyes were locked on my face, bulging from her skull as if her brain could not process the image it was receiving. Her mouth hung open, a silent scream trapped in her throat. She took a shaky step back, her legs wobbling so violently I thought she would collapse. She looked at Tyson, then at Reggie, then back at me, trying to solve an equation that had no answer. Her face was a mask of pure, unadulterated terror. The arrogance, the smug superiority, the cruelty, it all drained out of her, leaving behind a pale, trembling shell. Tyson was still on the floor where I had shoved him. He walked backward, pushing himself away with his heels until his back hit the sofa. He was hyperventilating, his chest heaving up and down in short, sharp gasps that sounded like a dying engine. He looked like a child who had just seen a monster crawl out from under his bed, only to realize the monster was his own father. He tried to speak, but only a high-pitched wheeze came out. He clawed at his collar as if he were choking. The party guests, the sharks and hustlers and fences who had been laughing at me 5 minutes ago, were now statues of fear. They knew the smell of power. They knew the scent of a predator, and they smelled it now rolling off me in waves. The air in the room had changed. It was no longer a party. It was a cage. The man in the snakeskin jacket tried to edge toward the back door, his eyes darting around looking for an escape route. Reggie simply cleared his throat, a sound like grinding stones, and stepped into his path, blocking the exit with his massive frame. He crossed his arms over his chest, his suit jacket straining against his muscles. "Nobody leaves," Reggie rumbled, his voice vibrating the windows. "The room is sealed." Panic began to ripple through the crowd. A woman near the kitchen dropped her purse, spilling stolen silverware onto the tile. A man by the window spilled his beer down his front. They looked at each other, realizing they were trapped. They realized they had been mocking a man who could buy and sell their entire lives before breakfast. They had thrown wine on a man who commanded an army. I saw the chop shop owner reach for his pocket, perhaps for a weapon, but he froze when he saw the cold, dead look in my eyes. He knew. He knew that if he made a move, he would not leave this house walking. I took a step forward. The floorboards did not creak this time. They seemed to solidify under my weight. I walked to the center of the room, stepping over the puddle of wine and broken glass, my boots crunching on the shards. I stopped in the middle of the Persian rug. I looked around the room, making eye contact with every single person. I looked at the fence. I looked at the disbarred lawyer. I looked at the guests who had laughed when the wine hit my face. They all looked away, unable to meet my gaze. I was sucking the oxygen out of the room. I was the gravity well, and they were being pulled in. I turned to Tyson and Tiffany. They were huddled together on the floor, a pathetic tableau of greed and cowardice. I stood over them, my shadow casting a long, dark shape over their trembling bodies. I did not raise my voice. I did not have to. When you have true power, you do not need to shout. You just need to speak. You thought the old lion had lost his teeth. I said, my voice low and rumbling like distant thunder filling every corner of the room. You thought because I walked slow and drove an old truck that I was weak. You thought because I loved you that I was blind. You mistook patience for weakness. You mistook silence for stupidity. You thought you could drug me. You thought you could sell me. You thought you could throw me in a basement and wait for me to die. I leaned down, getting close enough that they could see the fire in my eyes, close enough that they could feel the heat of my rage. But I was not weak. I hissed. I was just resting. I was just watching. I was giving you enough rope to hang yourselves. And tonight you kicked the chair out. I am not the victim here, children. I am the judge. I am the jury. And I am the executioner. And court is now in session. I turned my back to the cowering figures of my son and his wife and walked toward the fireplace. Above the mantel, mounted flush against the stone, was the 85-inch television Tyson had bought 3 months ago. I knew from my review of his credit card statements that he had paid $4,000 for it using a card opened in my name. It was a symbol of his gluttony, a massive black mirror that dominated the room. I picked up the remote control, which was sitting on the mantel next to a half-empty bottle of champagne. It felt light in my hand, plastic and insignificant, but in that moment it was the gavel of the judge. I turned back to face the room. The guests were frozen in place, staring at me with a mixture of fear and morbid curiosity. They knew something was coming. They knew the violence was over, but the judgment was just beginning. "You all came here for a show," I said, my voice booming in the silence. "You came to pick the bones of a dying man. You came to celebrate the liquidation of my life. Well, I am a gracious host. I would hate to send you home without entertainment. I pointed the remote at the screen and pressed the power button. The massive screen flared to life, illuminating the room with a harsh blue light. It was connected to a laptop sitting on the side table, a laptop Reggie had set up while I was revealing myself. The screen did not show a football game or a movie. It showed a logo, a golden lion on a black shield, the insignia of Blackwood Security. Tyson looked up from the floor, his eyes squinting against the glare. "What is that?" he whispered. "This," I said, "is the family home video you never knew we were making." I pressed play. The image on the screen was crystal clear. It was high-definition footage taken from a camera hidden in the smoke detector of the kitchen. The timestamp in the corner read December 24th, 6:40 p.m. The room gasped. There on the screen, larger than life, was Tiffany. She was standing at the island, her face twisted in a mask of intense concentration. The audio was perfect, amplified by the expensive surround sound speakers. The sound of ceramic grinding against ceramic filled the room. Scrape, scrape, scrape. We watched as Tiffany poured the blue powder from the mortar into the bowl of sweet potato pie. We watched Tyson standing in the background, scrolling frantically on his phone. "How long does it take?" Tyson's voice echoed from the speakers loud and clear. "Less than an hour if the dose is high enough," Tiffany's voice replied. The party guests recoiled. A woman near the back covered her mouth with her hand. The disbarred lawyer shook his head, muttering a curse. They were criminals, yes, but there is a hierarchy to crime. Theft is one thing. Poisoning your own father at Christmas dinner is a level of depravity that even the underworld finds repulsive. I fast-forwarded. The screen flickered and the scene changed. Now the image was grainy, green-tinted night vision. It was the basement. The timestamp was 2 days ago. The angle was from the corner of the room, capturing the entire damp concrete cell. There was Tyson pacing. There was Tiffany standing over my motionless body on the mattress. "We drive him across the border tonight," Tiffany's voice hissed from the speakers. "Kidneys, livers, corneas. He is worth more in parts than he is whole." The room went dead silent. The air was sucked out of the space. This was not just murder. This was butchery. This was the commodification of human life. I looked at Tiffany. She was staring at the screen, her face pale, her eyes wide and unblinking. She looked like she was watching her own autopsy. She was seeing the monster she truly was, projected in 4K resolution. I fast-forwarded again. The study. Tyson sitting at the desk, surrounded by papers. He was holding a pen, his hand shaking. Just one signature, he muttered to himself on the screen. Just one signature and Viper gets off my back. We watched him trace my signature onto the loan documents. We watched him practice it over and over again. We watched him commit felony forgery and fraud with the desperate, sweating intensity of a junkie. I paused the video. The image of Tyson signing my name froze on the screen, a monument to his betrayal. I turned to face them. Tyson was weeping silently, his head in his hands. Tiffany was rocking back and forth, mumbling "no, no, no" over and over again. "You thought you were clever," I said. "You thought you were invisible. But I have been watching you. Every moment, every lie, every crime. It is all here. Terabytes of evidence. Enough to put you away for 3 lifetimes. But that is not the best part," I continued. I pressed a button on the remote. The video of the forgery shrank, minimizing into the top left corner of the screen. The rest of the screen was suddenly filled with a different interface. It was a social media platform, a live stream dashboard, and in the center of the dashboard was a live feed of the room we were standing in right now. It was being filmed by a camera hidden in the motion sensor of the alarm system in the corner, and on the right side of the screen was a waterfall of text. It was moving so fast it was a blur. Comments, reactions, emojis. I pointed to the counter in the top right corner. The number was ticking up rapidly. 48,000, 49,000, 50,000. "Say hello to the world, children," I said, my voice cold as ice. "You are live." Tiffany looked at the screen. She saw the comments scrolling by. "Monster. Lock her up. I hope they rot. Call the FBI. She killed her own father-in-law. Despicable." The color drained from her face so completely she looked like a corpse. She scrambled to her feet, her hands clawing at her hair. "Turn it off," she screamed. "Turn it off. You cannot do this. My friends, my reputation, your reputation." I laughed. "Your reputation is gone, Tiffany. It is ashes. 50,000 people just watched you plan to sell my kidneys. 50,000 people just watched you poison my pie. Your boss is watching, your neighbors are watching, your mother is probably watching. You wanted to be a socialite. You wanted to be famous. Well, congratulations. You are the most famous woman in America right now, and everyone knows exactly what you are. Tyson looked up at the screen. He saw the number of viewers. He saw the hatred in the comments. He realized that his life as he knew it was over. He would never work in finance again. He would never show his face at the country club again. He was a pariah, a global pariah. You ruined us, he whispered. You ruined everything. I did not ruin you, I said, stepping closer to the camera so my face filled the live stream feed. I just turned the lights on. You ruined yourselves. I just made sure there was an audience to see the wreckage. I looked directly into the lens addressing the 50,000 strangers judging my family. This is what happens when you bite the hand that feeds you, I said. This is what happens when you mistake kindness for weakness. I turned back to Tyson and Tiffany. They were huddled together on the floor, sobbing, broken by the weight of 1,000,000 digital eyes. The police are on their way, I said, but honestly, prison will be a vacation compared to what is waiting for you out here. The internet never forgets, and neither do I. The live stream was still scrolling a waterfall of judgment on the massive screen, but I turned my back on it. The court of public opinion had rendered its verdict, but I still had the financial sentencing to deliver. Reggie stepped forward and handed me a thick black binder. It was heavy, not just with paper, but with the weight of my son's stupidity. I threw it onto the coffee table. The loud slap of the plastic against the wood made Tyson flinch. He looked up, his eyes red and swollen. Open it, I commanded. My voice was not loud, but it carried the weight of absolute authority. Tyson reached out with a trembling hand and flipped the cover. The first page was a corporate organizational chart. At the top was Blackwood Holdings. Branching down were various LLCs, property management firms, and investment vehicles. At the very bottom, nestled under the distressed assets division, was a logo he knew well. A green snake coiled around a dollar sign. Viper Capital. Tyson stared at the page, his brow furrowed. He blinked, trying to clear the tears and the confusion. He looked at the logo, then he looked up at me. I do not understand, he whispered. Why do you have Viper's internal documents? Did you pay them off? Did you buy my debt? I let out a short, sharp laugh. It was devoid of humor. You really are blind, Tyson. I did not pay them off. I did not buy your debt. I own the debt. I have always owned the debt. Viper Capital is a subsidiary of Blackwood Holdings. I bought that shark outfit 3 years ago to clean up the neighborhood and keep an eye on predatory lending practices. And imagine my surprise when my own son's name popped up on the delinquent list. Tyson's mouth fell open. Tiffany stopped her rocking and looked up her face, a mask of sheer disbelief. You own Viper, she croaked. I own the paper, I said, leaning over them. I own the sharks. I own the collectors. Every time you missed a payment, every time you dodged a call, every time you forged my signature to try and leverage my house, you were stealing from me. You were robbing your own father to pay your own father. And the worst part is, if you had just asked me for help, I might have forgiven the interest. I might have restructured the loan. But you did not ask. You tried to kill me. Tyson looked down at his hands. He looked at the forgery on the table. The realization hit him like a physical blow. He had planned a murder to pay off a debt to the victim. The futility of it, the sheer cosmic irony, was crushing him. You tried to sell my kidneys, I hissed, pointing at the screen where the night vision footage had frozen. You tried to chop me up and sell me across the border for $50,000. And the man you were trying to pay that $50,000 to was sitting right there in the wheelchair, listening to you. You were going to kill me to pay me. How does that math work, Tyson? Tell me how that makes sense. He could not answer. He just curled into a ball, his hands over his ears, trying to block out my voice, trying to block out the truth. He realized that he was not just a murderer, he was an idiot. A spectacular, historic failure of a man who had destroyed his soul for absolutely nothing. But I was not done. I signaled Reggie again. He reached into his briefcase and pulled out a single blue document. It looked official, stamped with a government seal. He placed it on the table next to the Viper chart. And then there is the matter of the house, I said, my voice dropping to a conversational tone that was somehow more terrifying than shouting. You were so worried about the equity. $2 million, you said. You were already spending it. You were looking at condos in Buckhead. You were picking out curtains. Tiffany looked at the blue paper. Her eyes were hungry again, desperate for a lifeline. Is that the deed, she asked? Can we still sell it? If we go to jail, can we use the money for lawyers? I shook my head slowly, marveling at her tenacity. You still do not get it, do you? You cannot sell this house. You never could, because this house does not belong to me. What do you mean? Tyson asked, lifting his head. It is in your name. I checked the county records. You checked the public records I corrected. You did not check the trust filings. 5 years ago, after your mother passed, I transferred the deed of this property into an irrevocable charitable remainder trust. The beneficiary is the St. Jude's Home for Orphaned Children. The room went silent again. Even the live stream chat seemed to slow down as the viewers processed this new twist. I have a life estate, I explained. That means I have the right to live here until my heart stops beating. But the second I die, the ownership transfers instantly and automatically to the orphanage. There is no probate. There is no inheritance. There is no equity for you to steal. I leaned in closer, my face inches from Tiffany's. So when you were grinding up those pills, when you were planning to push me down the stairs or drive me to Mexico, you were not speeding up your inheritance. You were speeding up your eviction. If I had died tonight, you would have been homeless by morning. The charity would have kicked you out before my body was even cold. You were killing me to make yourselves destitute. Tiffany stared at me. Her brain was trying to find a loophole, trying to find a way to win, but there was none. The walls were closing in. The house she coveted, the symbol of the status she craved, was a mirage. She was sitting in a house that belonged to orphans. She was a squatter in a charity ward. We have nothing, she whispered. The realization was total. Her voice was hollow, stripped of all its sharpness. We have no money. We have no house. We have no jobs. We have nothing. You have debt, I reminded her. You owe me $300,000 in credit card fraud. You owe Viper $50,000 plus penalties. And you owe the state of Georgia a lot of time. Tyson let out a low moan, a sound of pure animal despair. He looked around the room, at the lavish furniture, at the expensive electronics, at the trappings of the life he had stolen. It was all dust. It was all borrowed. He had betrayed the only person in the world who had ever truly loved him, and he had done it for a prize that did not exist. He had sold his soul for fool's gold. I stood up straight, adjusting my cuffs. The final nail was in the coffin. I had stripped them of their illusions. I had shown them that their greed was not only immoral, it was incompetent. They were not masterminds. They were fools playing with matches in a powder keg. And now the explosion was here. Tiffany collapsed. It was not a theatrical faint. It was a genuine physical failure. Her legs gave out and she slid sideways, hitting the floor with a dull thud. She curled into a fetal position, her expensive dress bunching up around her waist, her face pressed into the Persian rug. She began to scream. It was a high, thin sound like a tea kettle boiling over. She screamed for her lost life. She screamed for her lost freedom. She screamed because the reality of her future had finally crashed down on her. She was going to prison. She was going to be a felon. She was going to be poor. And for a woman like Tiffany, being poor was a fate worse than death. Tyson did not scream. He just shook. He sat cross-legged on the floor, rocking back and forth, his eyes wide and unseeing. He was muttering to himself, a stream of gibberish. I am sorry, Dad. I am sorry. It was the pie, the blue pills, the ink. It is hard to wash off. He looked at his thumb. The red ink from the pad was still there, bright and damning. He started to scrub it against his pants, frantically trying to erase the mark of his betrayal. Out-damned spot. But it would not come off. It was stained into his skin, just as his crime was stained into his soul. Reggie stepped up beside me. The police are 2 minutes out, Cyrus, he said quietly. The perimeter is secure. I looked down at the wreckage of my family, my son broken and babbling, my daughter-in-law screaming into the carpet, the live stream audience watching it all, eating up the tragedy. It was a scene of total devastation, a nuclear wasteland of the heart. I felt a pang of sadness, not for them, but for the memories that had lived in this house. The Christmas mornings, the birthday parties, the quiet dinners with Beatrice, all of it was tainted now. This house was a crime scene. Open the door, Reggie, I said, turning away from them. Let the officers in. I am done here. I walked toward the kitchen, leaving them on the floor. I needed a glass of water. My throat was dry. And I needed to wash the taste of sweet potato pie out of my mouth forever. As I ran the tap, I heard the sirens cut their wails as they pulled into the driveway. The blue lights flashed through the window, illuminating the kitchen in harsh strobes. It was the end of the party. It was the end of the line. and outside in the cool night air I could finally breathe again. I stood at the kitchen sink, gripping the cold glass of water as the front door of the house disintegrated. It did not open. It was breached. The battering ram hit the heavy oak with a thunderous crack that shook the foundation, sending a cloud of splinters and dust into the foyer. The noise was deafening, a chaotic symphony of shouting voices and heavy boots stomping on hardwood. A dozen tactical officers flooded into the living room, their weapons drawn, their flashlights cutting through the gloom like lightsabers. They moved with a terrifying efficiency, shouting commands that overlapped into a wall of sound. "Police, get down, hands where I can see them, nobody move." The party guests, the sharks and bottom feeders who had been so arrogant moments ago, hit the floor instantly. They knew the drill. They scattered like cockroaches, exposed by a sudden light covering their heads and curling into balls. I watched calmly from the kitchen archway. I took a sip of water. It was cool and clean, washing away the lingering phantom taste of betrayal. Reggie stood near the fireplace, his hands raised calmly, showing his palms. He was the only one not panicking. He knew the officers. He had likely briefed the captain himself. The officers swarmed Tyson and Tiffany. They were not treated gently. This was not a white-collar arrest for tax evasion. This was a takedown for conspiracy to commit murder and human trafficking. An officer in full riot gear grabbed Tyson by the back of his shirt, hauling him up from the floor. Tyson let out a yelp of surprise, his legs scrambling for purchase. Another officer secured Tiffany, twisting her arms behind her back with professional force. The click of the handcuffs ratcheting shut was the sweetest sound I had heard in 40 years. It sounded like justice. It sounded like closure. The room was a whirlwind of blue uniforms and terrified screams, but amidst the chaos, I walked slowly into the living room. The officers parted for me, knowing who I was. I stood in the center of the storm, the eye of the hurricane, watching the final destruction of my son's life. He looked at me, his eyes wide with terror and confusion. He looked at the police, then back at me, realizing finally that there was no escape. The live stream camera was still running, capturing every second of their downfall for the world to see. Then the accusations started. It began as a whisper, a desperate plea from Tiffany as the officer tightened the cuffs on her wrists. "It is not me," she sobbed, her mascara running down her face in black streaks, making her look like a deranged clown. "It is him. It was his idea. I am the victim here. Officer, please listen to me. He forced me to do it. He is abusive. He made me grind the pills." Tyson's head snapped toward her. His shock turned instantly into a rabid, cornered fury. "You liar," he screamed, struggling against the officer holding him. "You bought the pills. You are the one who looked up the dosage on your phone. I have the search history, Tiffany. It is on your iPad. She told me to do it, officer. She said we had to get rid of him because of the debt. She planned the Mexico trip. She knew the guy in Tijuana who buys the organs." "Shut up, you coward," Tiffany shrieked, spitting in his direction. "You are the one who forged the signature. You are the one who stole his identity. I was just trying to save our home. I was trying to fix your mistakes. You are a loser, Tyson. You have always been a loser. That is why your father hates you. That is why he set us up. Because you are weak." "I am not weak," Tyson roared, tears streaming down his face, mixing with the snot running from his nose. "I did everything for you. I stole for you. I lied for you. I almost killed my own father for you. And now you are turning on me." I watched them tear each other apart. It was fascinating in a grotesque way. Their love, their marriage, their partnership was revealed for what it truly was. A mutual pact of parasitism. As soon as the host body fought back, the parasites turned on each other, devouring their own kind to survive. They screamed over each other, their voices overlapping into a cacophony of guilt. He put the powder in the pie. She poured the wine on him. He called the forger. She called the chop shop. They were confessing to everything. They were doing the district attorney's job for him, handing him a conviction on a silver platter. The officers did not even have to interrogate them. They just let them talk, letting the body cams record every venomous word. It was the end of their dignity. They were stripping themselves naked in front of the world, showing everyone the rot that lived inside their souls. The officer handling Tyson began to drag him toward the door. Tyson's legs gave out. He went limp, dragging his feet on the floor, his expensive Italian loafers scuffing against the wood. He looked back at me. His rage evaporated, replaced by a sudden crushing realization of his doom. He saw me standing there untouched, unmoved, and the reality of his situation broke him. "Dad," he wailed. The word hung in the air, pitiful and small. He threw himself forward, breaking the officer's grip for a second. He fell to his knees, sliding across the floor until he was at my feet. He could not use his hands because they were cuffed behind his back, so he pressed his forehead against the toe of my boot. He was prostrating himself. He was begging, "Dad, please. Tell them to stop. Tell them it was a mistake. I am your son. I am Tyson. You taught me to fish. You taught me to ride a bike. Do not let them take me. I am scared, Dad. I am so scared." I looked down at him. I looked at the back of his head, at the hair that was thinning just like mine had at his age. I remembered holding him when he was a baby, promising to protect him from the world. I remembered the pride I felt when he graduated college. I remembered the day he got married, thinking he had found happiness. But then I remembered the blue powder in the mortar. I remembered the cold basement floor. I remembered his voice discussing the price of my kidneys. I felt a single tear roll down my cheek, but my heart remained stone. I did not step back. I did not kick him away. I reached into my pocket and pulled out a handkerchief. It was a simple white cotton square pressed and folded. I leaned down slowly. Tyson looked up, hope flaring in his wet eyes, thinking I was reaching for him, thinking I was going to wipe his tears. I reached past his face. I touched the handkerchief to the toe of my boot, right where his forehead had rested. I wiped the leather, removing the smudge of sweat and grease he had left there. I cleaned my shoe. I stood up, folding the handkerchief, exposing the dirt-stained side to him before dropping it onto the floor beside his knee. "My son died 3 days ago," I said, my voice devoid of all warmth. "He died the moment he watched his wife poison my food and did nothing to stop her. You are not my son. You are just a stranger who broke into my house." Tyson let out a sound that was not human. It was the sound of a soul breaking. The officer grabbed him by the arm and hauled him up, dragging him backward toward the door. He did not fight anymore. He just stared at me, his eyes dead, his spirit crushed. Reggie stepped up beside me, placing a hand on my shoulder. "It is over, Cyrus," he said quietly. "They are gone." I watched them disappear through the shattered door into the flashing lights of the police cruisers. I listened as the sirens began to wail again, carrying away the wreckage of my family. I stood alone in the living room, surrounded by the debris of the party and the silence of an empty house. I was tired. I was old. But I was alive. And for the first time in a long time, I was free. The trial was not a spectacle, it was a formality. With the live stream footage, the forged documents, and the testimony of the FBI informant, there was nowhere for them to hide. Their expensive defense team, paid for by liquidating the last of Tiffany's jewelry, could not save them from the mountain of evidence I had systematically compiled. I sat in the front row of the courtroom every single day. I wanted them to see me, to see. I wanted them to remember the face of the man they tried to kill, not as a victim, but as the architect of their demise. When the gavel finally fell, it sounded like the heavy door of a vault slamming shut. Tyson Blackwood and Tiffany Blackwood were found guilty on all counts, including conspiracy to commit murder, aggravated identity theft, and elder abuse. The judge, a stern woman who had watched the videos with visible disgust, sentenced them to 20 years in federal prison without the possibility of parole. They did not look at me as they were led away in chains. They looked at the floor. They looked at the shackles on their wrists. They were no longer the socialites of the suburbs. They were inmates' numbers in a system that did not care about their aspirations or their comfort. The house was seized by the authorities. The cars were repossessed. The remaining assets were auctioned off to pay a fraction of the restitution they owed me and the state. Everything they had built on a foundation of lies was ground into dust. Justice is not always swift, but in this case it was absolute. They wanted a life of leisure at my expense. Now they have plenty of leisure time in a 6x8 cell to think about the price of sweet potato pie. 6 months later, I stood on a quiet hill overlooking the Atlanta skyline. The grass was green and manicured, the air smelling of magnolias and fresh rain. In front of me stood the simple granite headstone of my wife, Beatrice. For years I had come here alone, bearing the weight of my secret success and the heavy burden of our son's failures. But today I was not alone. Standing behind me in a respectful semicircle were 12 young men and women. They were doctors, engineers, teachers, artists. They were not my blood. They did not share my DNA. They were the children of the St. Jude's Home for orphaned children. They were the recipients of the trust fund I had established decades ago. The true beneficiaries of the real estate empire I had built in the shadows. I had paid for their colleges. I had mentored them. I had watched them grow into the people Tyson refused to become. A young woman named Sarah stepped forward. She was a pediatric surgeon, now a woman who saved lives every day instead of trying to take them. She placed a hand on my arm. "We are here for you, Mr. Blackwood," she said softly. "You are our father in every way that matters." I looked at them. I saw respect in their eyes. I saw gratitude. I saw love. It was not the transactional love of Tyson and Tiffany. It was earned. It was real. I realized then that I had not lost a family. I had simply pruned a dead branch so the rest of the tree could flourish. Beatrice would have loved them. She would have been proud, not of the money, but of the lives we built with it. People often ask me if I regret what I did. They ask if it hurts to send your own flesh and blood to prison. The answer is simple: no. Regret is for mistakes. What I did was a correction. I spent a lifetime believing that blood was the strongest bond on earth. I thought that if I gave my son enough, if I loved him enough, he would become a good man. I was wrong. Blood is just biology. Loyalty is a choice. Integrity is a choice. And when someone chooses to betray you, they forfeit their seat at your table regardless of whose last name they share. I learned the hard way that you cannot buy character. You cannot inherit dignity. Money is a magnificent tool, but it is a terrible master. It revealed my son's rot, just as surely as it revealed the potential in the orphans standing behind me. I turned away from the grave. I walked down the path, my head held high, my stride strong. Waiting at the curb was not my rusted Ford truck. It was a gleaming black Rolls-Royce Phantom. The driver opened the door for me. I slid into the leather seat, leaving the dust of the past behind. I had my health. I had my true family. And I had my peace. The world thought I was a victim. They thought I was a frail old man ripe for the taking. They forgot that before you can build a skyscraper, you have to dig a deep foundation. And I have been digging for a very long time. I am Cyrus Blackwood, and I am just getting started. This story teaches us a brutal but necessary truth. Biological relation is not a license for abuse. We often cling to toxic family members out of a sense of obligation, believing that shared DNA justifies forgiveness for the unforgivable. But true loyalty is earned through respect, not inherited at birth. My son mistook my silence for stupidity and my generosity for weakness, proving that money does not change people, it simply unmasks them. In the end, the most important investment you can make is not in real estate or stocks, but in your own self-worth. Never set yourself on fire just to keep ungrateful people warm. If you enjoyed this story of ultimate justice, please hit that like button and subscribe to the channel for more. Let me know in the comments below, would you have forgiven Tyson because he was family, or would you have sent him to prison just like I did? I read every single comment. See you in the next story.